Hello, everyone. It's 1:32 p.m. in New York on Sunday, September 14th, and it's time for our weekly podcast, our edition of Art is the Church of God the Creator. And this is Gregory Muna, aka Master Moo, and I am here to just read and discuss and analyze and respond in real time to your comments just on the chat thread here. We're talking about music and our experience of music on a deep level, as in terms of meditation, in terms of our theological understanding, our philosophical understandings, and we are trying to draw upon Eastern and Western visions, global North, global South, old and new. We're trying to, and I know that sounds ridiculously broad, and that makes me perhaps open to accusations of being a charlatan, but folks, I may be a charlatan, but I'm not a fraud. I'm not doing this to as a get-rich-quick scheme. I'm not trying to manipulate anyone. I'm simply trying to communicate honestly what I believe in and what I hope you believe in too. And I'm trying to create an online community for people who have a shared feelings, even if it makes me look foolish in the process, then guilty as charged. And I'll try not to be too much of a tiresome pedant. But of course, anyone who is just out there talking about non-commercial subjects is going to be seen as a tiresome pedant. So if that's the case, just text me and let me know, and I'll try to adjust things accordingly. I want to continue with my sort of personal relationship to the life and the teachings of the now deceased John Cage. And I wanted to read a little bit from his book, Silence, Lectures and Writings by John Cage. Here it is, published originally by Wesleyan University. And I didn't spend a lot of time with John Cage. He did residencies at Oberlin when I was there, and I got to, take some master classes with him, and I interviewed him for WOBC, the radio station. Hopefully one of these days I'll actually transfer that tape and publish a transcript of that, because it was very interesting. And we hung out, we made music together. I remember he played my piano, and we were, I was at the conservatory as well, and we did a premiere of one of his pieces. It was very nice. It was very nice. Some of this really is straight from the horse's mouth. So last week I read a bit of his lecture from 1958, or started in 1958, entitled Communication. And I just wanted to read that one line that he started with, because he repeated this to me in person. So it was personally meaningful, and I think it's relevant to today. Nichi, nichi, koriko nichi. Every day is a beautiful day. Or actually, when I spoke with Cage, he translated it as day, day, beautiful day. Nichi, nichi, koriko nichi. Day, day, beautiful day. And then he paraphrased it as every day is a beautiful day. And that's a wonderful aspiration. It happens to be true right now. Day, day, beautiful day. Every day is we're right now at the end of summer. And it's just, every day is beautiful right now. Of course, that won't be true a month from now. It won't be true in October, November, December. It gets worse and worse. And, where I am, New York, is mostly terrible weather. But right now it's beautiful weather. And I'm definitely in the mood to say, to repeat the words of John Cage, who was quoting a Zen proverb, Nichi, nichi, koriko nichi. Day, day, beautiful day. Every day is a beautiful day. So I hope that can put us in an uplifted and cheerful mood. What I talked about last week was Cage's aesthetic of silence as the container of sound, not silence as a troll. I really wanted to. And, it's very tricky when you're talking about Cage because he partially was a troll. I mean, he claimed he didn't do anything for shock or as a joke, but a lot of what he did was received as shock and as a joke. I mean, he was personal friends with Marcel Duchamp, who famously, shockingly, put the mustache on the Mona Lisa and exhibited a urinal, as a sculpture, and it's that type of shock art that gets people's attention. It's a sort of trolls that people love to, view the whole art world as just sort of meaningless jokesters and who want to make fun of the idea of art. And and a lot of people view what Cage did in the 50s and the 60s as just a revival of Dada. It's not even original because Dadaism, of course, which was the anti-art movement of post-World War I centered in Zurich, Switzerland, was meant to destroy the 19th century bourgeois Kunstreligion, or the art religion of the Romanticism. And so Dada was meant as a deliberately nihilistic attack on romantic aesthetics and the sacralized idea of art that developed in the 19th century. And this is anathema to my way of thinking. My way of thinking, and I hope your way of thinking, if you're thinking here with me, is that we need more of that good old-time Kunstreligion. In fact, our problem with Kunstreligion is that we do not view it as fraudulent or false. We view it as not enough, as it was not taken seriously enough, and it was too limited. The problem with the bourgeois Kunstreligion was not the Kunstreligion, is that it was bourgeois, is that it was restricted to the haute bourgeoisie, not even the petty bourgeoisie. It was, essentially it was a badge of social distinction for a tiny percentage of the population. What we are looking to do is to a universal democratize Kunstreligion. We want, our mission is to bring art religion to the whole planet and beyond, to the whole universe. And since we are, as far as we can see, the only art capable matter in the whole universe, i.e. us human beings are, as far as we can see, are the only form of matter in the universe who have sense perceptions and who have agency, who have bodies, who have hand-eye coordination, or able to work with media, are able to work with media to create sense perceptual objects that are intentionally created, paintings, poems, musical compositions, sculptures, and so on. So our position is that, as far as we can tell, we are freakishly lucky that in the whole universe we're the only ones who have that ability, and we view this as significant. We do not view this as meaningless or just random. All right, as far as we're concerned, this is supremely significant. The fact that we are conscious, the fact that we exist, the fact that we are aware of our existence, the fact that we are alive, the fact that we are aware of that we are alive, the fact that we have sense perceptions, we are aware of our sense perceptions. We have emotions, we are aware of our emotions. We have rational thought processes, and we are able to think about our rational thought processes. All of the above, that we not only have perception, but we have meta-perception. This is what art is. Sorry to throw out a funny sounding word. We have we not only have cognition, but we have metacognition. We not only have rationality, but we have meta-rationality. We're able to think rationally about our logical processes, which is that we have it's all recursivity, of information. That not only are we information, as all living matter things are in the universe, but our information, we are aware of our information, which is to say our thoughts, our perceptions, our emotions, our cognitions, all of that. And we're able then to consciously direct and focus our emotions, all of the above. And this is the unique privilege of being born a human being. And this is, in fact, supremely important and supremely valuable. And we only have it from the moment of our birth until the moment of our death. And that's that. So we've got to make the most of it. I'm trying to do something despite all of my self-sabotage and all of the sabotage which has come from outside of myself. And I'm sure we are all struggling. I'm sure you struggle. I'm sure everyone is struggling in that sense. So, Cage is a Janus face figure. He looks on one hand to this sort of anti-artistic Dadaism, which mocks any spiritual component of art whatsoever. He also has another face which is looking at it very seriously, especially in terms of concepts that come from the Eastern traditions, that come from yoga, Confucianism, Buddhism, Zen, and so on and so forth, of a very deeply spiritual understanding of art. And this is the side of Cage that we're focusing on, his spiritual side, not his troll side, understanding that he contains both. All right? And so I just want to read little bits of his topics. We focused last week on Cage's aesthetics of silence and sort of the spiritual dimension of silence. And silence has two meanings or two categories of meaning for Cage. One is simply the contemplative silence, the silence of 4 minutes and 33 seconds of continuous ambient attention, of just paying attention to the sounds that are happening, the passing of a truck on the street, or, a jet overhead, or the sound of school children, or just the sound of water in the pipes. Or as Cage famously mentioned, and he mentioned this to me, if you go into an anoechic chamber and you can't hear anything of the outside world, you can still hear the sounds inside of your own body. You can still hear a low hum, the sound of your circulation, and a high sinusoid, which is the sound of your nervous system. And what I'm in my compositions here, which use sinusoids, are directly working with the neurological system, because I'm working with my own neurological system, because I'm trying to overcome my own neurological deficits, and I am trying to create healthful neurological feedback patterns for myself, and I'm trying to share them with you. And I hope that whatever is beneficial for me will also be beneficial for you. And when I experience that benefit, it is intensely emotional. It has a tremendous emotional and visual and poetic meaning to me, as much as a sonata movement by Beethoven, or a fugue by Bach, or an etude by Chopin. So for me, the emotional significance of that sonic neurological benefit is tremendously emotional, tremendously poetic, sacred in both the sort of literal and metaphorical sense of the term. But silence, the other value of silence, and which is what I want to talk about today, not his aesthetic silence, but his structural sense of silence, his poetic silence, by Poetics, I mean like literally in the making, the poesis of his works, is that for Cage, silence is a compositional tool to frame individual sounds. That obviously a sound becomes a sound when it has a beginning and an ending. And before that beginning is silence, and after that ending is silence. So, what we think of as a musical sound, there's silence, there's sound, there's silence. And silence is the frame. And I will have to look up, was it not Leibniz? I'm going to have to look up the source of the famous quote that music is the sound held in the chalice of silence. I'm paraphrasing, so I'm going to have to look that up and maybe discuss that next time. Perhaps that's Meister Eckhart? Is that Leibniz? Well, perhaps it was Meister Eckhart. I'll look that up. Or perhaps it was Rumi. Meister Eckhart was tremendously important to Cage. We don't have time to talk about Meister Eckhart today, but Eckhart von Hochheim, commonly known as Meister Eckhart, or Johannes Esser, was a German Catholic priest, theologian, philosopher, and mystic from Thuringia in central Germany in the Holy Roman Empire. His approximate dates are 1260 to 1328, and he was a contemplative Catholic philosopher during the time of the schismatic Avignon papacy. And he was put on trial for heresy, and he defended himself, and he was not killed, thank God, but he was ultimately sort of left in a kind of legalistic limbo, and I think eventually he was excommunicated. But Cage always talked about Eckhart, and when he tried to make connections between Zen and Confucianism, Taoism, and in other words, Eastern thought and Western thought. So I want to read a little bit from Cage's essay on Forerunners of Modern Music, which began notes actually they started compiling in 1949. And I want to move on to a short, a rhythmicized lecture, a lecture on nothing. In Forerunners of Modern Music, Cage talks about his philosophy of structure, of rhythmic structure. So, again, our theme for today is Cage's poetics of structural rhythm, or Cage's structural poetics. And so I'll just read a couple of pages, page 62, 63 of his book Silence, Forerunners of Modern Music. And it also includes some footnotes, so we'll be going back and forth in the text. Okay, Forerunners of Modern Music. The purpose of music. Music is edifying, for from time to time it sets the soul in operation. The soul is the gatherer together of the disparate elements, Meister Eckhart, and its work fills one with peace and love. Okay, so this is Cage's serious side. I mean, he's using these terms, soul, peace, and love, unironically and straightforwardly, in the same sense that a Christian mystic such as Meister Eckhart would. Okay, and he always spoke in this way. So, you know, he spoke about the spiritual in music very straightforwardly, very seriously, and not with a smirk. Unlike people who think he was just an art world troll. Okay, next section, definitions. Structure in music is its divisibility into successive parts from phrases to long sections. Form is content, the continuity. Method is the means of controlling the continuity from note to note. The material of music is sound and silence. Integrating these is composing. Okay, I think this is really worth repeating. I really think Cage is saying something very true and very straightforward and very profound here. about structure. Again, today's topic is John Cage's structural poetics. Structure in music is its divisibility into successive parts from phrases to long sections. Form is content, the continuity. Method is the means of controlling the continuity from note to note. The material of music is sound and silence. Integrating these is composing. So these are his definitions of form, method, material, and composing. These four. Now he continues from here. So our focus today is on structure, rhythmic structure, right? And okay, so strategy. Structure is properly mind controlled. Both delight in precision, clarity, and the observance of rules, whereas form wants only freedom to be. It belongs to the heart and the law it observes, if indeed it submits to any, has never been and never will be written. Footnote. Any attempt to exclude the irrational is irrational. Any composing strategy which is wholly rational is irrational in the extreme. Okay, so that's very interesting that he was saying this in 1949. It was translated into French and published later in the same year in 1949, and it had tremendous impact on the younger generation of French composers at that time, specifically Pierre Boulez, who in 1951, under the tutelage or the example of Olivier Messiaen, wrote his structures for piano, in which he tried to create a completely rational composition in which every element was completely sort of algorithmically predetermined. Yeah. And of course, the result is completely, I would say, very completely unmusical and baffling. It was just an experiment. It was just an experiment, mind experiment, but really, it really only works on paper, my opinion. I love Boulez and I love other pieces, but I cannot stand his structures for two pianos. All right, let's go back. But of course, he loosened up that wholly rational attempt as he matured as a composer, as his ear improved. Well, okay. And but let's get away from Boulez. I've talked about Boulez, and I've given talks about what Boulez means to me and why we should respect him. No, but it's we don't need to look at his experimental early pieces. We can look at his great mature masterpieces. Okay, back to the text. Method may be planned or improvised. It makes no difference. In one case, the emphasis shifts towards thinking, in the other towards feeling. A piece for radios as instruments would give up the matter of method to accident. Cage is referring here to his own notorious piece for 12 radios, The Imaginary Landscapes, in which which was viewed essentially as a kind of a beatnik proto happening, sort of art world joke of giving instructions on tuning into radios. Likewise, material may be controlled or not, as one chooses. Normally, the choice of sounds is determined by what is pleasing and attractive to the ear. Delight in the giving or receiving of pain being an indication of sickness. Okay, so the choice of sounds is determined by what is pleasing and attractive to the ear. I have to make my own subjective criteria there, but I think there are certain objective limits. I mean, obviously, when you more than 80 decibels, we get to the threshold of pain. People like playing around with that threshold in big orchestral climaxes, but if it stays continuously at or above 80 decibels, then we are talking like, rock concert, death metal, jet taking off, highway traffic. We're talking about very dangerous levels of noise. And the result is that we are not evolved to handle that. Our ears recoil from that, and we develop hearing loss as a result. Which reminds me, I've got to get my earwax checked and get an audiology checkup. Luckily, the last times it's been good. But we can never take our hearing for granted. Look at Beethoven, who had much better hearing than I could ever imagine, and, he lost it. Beethoven among how many others. Okay. So delight in the giving of receiving pain be indication of sickness. And, this is Cage, again, refuting the idea that he's just a trickster or a troll, or that he's just trying to make people miserable, But delightful sounds to me are sounds which show the unfolding of a natural overtone series in which there is a clear audible relationship of the partials to the fundamental, and in which there is a clear rhythmic relationship between the separate parts, and attractive to the ear. That's what I find attractive to my ear. Music that's not too loud, which is above, obviously, the threshold of hearing, which is audible but not noisy, which is as noiseless as possible, because noise takes up mental space and gives me a headache, right? But I'm subject to migraines and such. You may not. You may enjoy noisier music. I enjoyed noisier music when I was in high school. I played in punk rock bands, and all right, but not now. Back to the text. Refrain. Activity involving a single process, the many turning them, even though some seem to be opposites towards oneness, contributes to a good way of life. Let's repeat his sort of little mantra here. Activity involving, in a single process, the many, turning them, even though some of them seem to be opposites towards oneness, contributes to a good way of life. Okay, what Cage is articulating here as an axiom or as a precept is the Platonic idea of unity. That artistic process is e pluribus unum, that out of many one, that you take many disparate elements and the artist unifies them. That poesis, the poetics here, structural poetics, is taking disparate elements and through artistic intuition, craft, and skill, forging it into a unity. And again, this flies in the face of people who seem to think that Cage was only arguing for complete sort of nihilistic anarchy and disunity. Okay. But, how do we do that in music? I mean, traditionally we do that through harmony, through counterpoint, through, the building forms towards climaxes and resolution. In modern music, we have to think of alternate structural means. And Cage will elaborate on his idea of structure versus form and method. Structure, form, method, material. Composing, these 5 subtopics. Okay, the plot thickens. Back to the text. The plot thickens. When asked why, God being good, there was evil in the world, Sri Ramakrishna said, to thicken the plot. That's a little slightly cheeky here. Okay. But the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna was tremendously important, in addition to Meister Eckhart and the Zen of Daiso Suzuki and the Book of Changes of, this is one of the most important things. Maybe we'll talk about Ramakrishna as we go forward, and maybe we'll talk more about Advaita Vedanta, like, Ramana Maharshi and stuff. Okay, the aspect of composition that can properly be discussed with the end view of general agreement is structure, for it is devoid of mystery. Analysis is at home here. Schools teach the making of structures by means of classical harmony. Outside school, however, e.g. Satie and Webern, a different and correct structural means reappears. One based on lengths of time. So he has 3 footnotes here. But before we get to that, he says outside school, Satie and Webern. He's holding up Satie and Webern, and I agree, as great composers who do not base their works on the functional harmony. He says that schools teach the making structure by means of classical harmony, functional harmony. And what is functional harmony? We've talked about that. Functional harmony is the basic opposition, a movement from a tonic chord, which is basically the 4th, 5th, and 6th overtones of a fundamental pitch, the tonic triad. If we are moving bass up, as opposed to if we're moving in a neo-Riemannian conception from the treble down, then that forms the 5th, the 3rd, and the root of the minor triad, right? I mean, because Riemannian harmony is based upon a symmetrical axis, and in the bass, the generative structural triads that emerge out of the fundamental bass are the major triads, and the triads that emerge out of the top fundamentals are the minor triads. So we have this fundamental inversional symmetry between major and minor that gives rise to our whole system of major minor tonality in this sort of neo-Riemannian way of viewing things. I like for us to keep together Schenker and Riemann, and also pitch class set theory, like to integrate all 3 of those, within a kind of Neo-Pythagorean or post-Neo-Pythagorean framework, of course. So Satie and Webern do not build their structures out of moving from the tonic to the dominant back to the tonic. So home, tension, release, and resolution. So for him, what is different and correct, his first footnote is that what makes a correct structure, he says, sound has 4 characteristics: pitch, timbre, loudness, and duration. The opposite and necessary coexistent of sound is silence. Of the 4 characteristics of sound, again, pitch, timbre, loudness, and duration, only duration involves both sound and silence. Therefore, a structure based on durations, rhythmic, phrase, rhythmic, time lengths, is correct. Corresponds with the nature of the material. And again, what is the material? The material of music is sound and silence, right? Therefore, this is correct. Whereas harmonic structure is incorrect, derived from pitch, which has no being in silence. Okay, so if we think of structure as how a piece unfolds in time, well, I mean, if we just, take the sort of Schenkerian ersatz of the, tonic, dominant, tonic, well, Cage's argument, and I agree with him, is that there's no real actual sense of how this has to emerge in time. And the problem with common practice tonality, of classical harmony, of tonic, dominant, tonic, is that it distorts the basic rhythmic structure. You can have the same piece played at a fast tempo, a slow tempo, and then people get all fetishistic about conductor A plays it at this tempo and it's 25 minutes long, and then conductor B plays it at that tempo and it's 19 minutes long, and so on. I mean, in other words, there is no objective relationship between the harmonic structure and the time structure. It's very approximate, and it can be subject to, incredible manipulations of rubato and time phrasing and stuff like that, and accelerando and ritardando and all those things that distort the basic pulsation or the taktus. Okay, that was his comment one. Yeah, footnote, that was footnote 2. Footnote 3, he says, the a structural means reappears one based on lengths of time. His comment is, this never disappeared from jazz and folk music. On the other hand, it never developed in them, for they are not cultivated species, growing best when left wild. What he means in terms of jazz and folk music is that there, of course, there's an inherent percussive element in both jazz and folk music. The quintessential jazz ensemble includes drums, and there is, a metronomic beat, and then the rubato elements are overlaid over a metronomic beat, so that mixed timbre of percussion plus strings and winds is the characteristic jazz sound, as opposed to the homogeneous timbre sound ideal of, say, a string quartet, or of a piano and stuff like that, where you don't have mixtures of different sounds. Right. Cage, of course, in his own work, understood that the piano timbre, and this is my comment and his comment, that certain instrumental timbres, of course, have noise content in them, and that can be manipulated for percussive effect. I mean, the piano is technically a percussion instrument, and Cage, of course, with his prepared piano techniques, found ways to maximize the percussive, that is to say, i.e. the noisy attacks of the piano, and to make it sound more like a percussion orchestra and less like a classical instrument. In that sense, he declassicized the piano, and he's very famous for that. And I certainly like some of his prepared piano music, especially the prepared piano music, which is in deep dialogue with other musics that I enjoy, such as the gamelan, the Balinese gamelan, or West African drumming. But I can't say that I feel that's true of all of his prepared piano music. I mean, a lot of the sonatas and interludes are just not musically valuable for me. If you disagree, please comment right here. All right. Let's get back to his text. And, of course, writing in 1949, and this was originally published in French, he uses some outdated language here. So instead of speaking of the Eastern Hemisphere, Asia, for example, he uses the terms Oriental and Occidental instead of like East and West and so on. So I hope we can overlook his dated language and not get all offended or accusing him of racist language, all right? When he says, in the Orient, harmonic structure is traditionally unknown, and unknown with us in our pre-Renaissance culture. Harmonic structure is a recent Occidental phenomenon for the past century in the process of disintegration. Okay, and then he has footnote 5. I'll read his footnote 5. For an interesting detailed proof of this, see Casella's book on cadence. Okay, so he's referring to the Italian composer Casella, and but cadence is what articulates 151, the perfect authentic cadence with like the 7/1 resolution and the high voice, is what comes in. Starts coming in cadential forms and triadic and cadences in the Renaissance, and really only completely dominates music from the Baroque. So it sort of gradually comes in, sort of the triadic, tonic dominant movement starting in the 1400s. But it's really only since the 1600s that there's a regulated system of tonic dominant and predominant and regulation, which we call the common practice tonality of music from the 1600s through the 1900s. But he says, for the past century, in a process of disintegration. Now, writing in 1949, for the past century, he's really dating that from mid-19th century chromaticism, such as Wagner, and I've already given my sort of take on how we should listen to Wagner's most chromatic music, i.e. Tristan. I am very excited this season about a couple of musical events. which I'll be talking about. One is the new production of Tristan at the Met, conducted music director Yannick Nézet-Séguin. We'll talk about that when that premieres in March. And then later this month in September, we'll be looking at the world premiere of The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by my friend and colleague Mason Bates. And but I promise not to be a flack. I hope that we can listen analytically and give our honest responses. Okay. So what he's saying is that ever since the heightened chromaticism, and especially the sort of the 7-limit harmonic concept inaugurated by Wagner in Tristan, where the seventh chord, and it becomes a degree and a chord of rest, of resolution, rather than a chord of tension. So that inversion of that harmonic language, that he says that's, and I think most people would agree that this was a critical moment of harmonic distinction, which of course continues then, of course, through the later Romantics and through Strauss and Mahler and Schoenberg, and finally to his Cage's Cage studied with Schoenberg, and the post-Schoenbergian composers of Webern and Boulez, which were Boulez was his contemporary, and Webern had just died. Schoenberg was still alive when this was written. Schoenberg lived in 1952, and this was originally written in 1949. Okay, so again, now relating to Schoenberg is continuing. He says, atonality has happened, and he has a comment here. The term atonality makes no sense. Schoenberg substitutes pantonality. Lou Harrison, to my mind and experience, the preferable term prototonality. John Cage was a student of Schoenberg's at UCLA, and that is true. That was Schoenberg's term, pantonality. Lou Harrison was his younger contemporary, and also a teacher and a friend of mine, a vibrant part of the gamelan community. And since I played gamelan, and since Lou Harrison was our great gamelan, American gamelan composer, I spent a lot of time with him, master classes and attending his concerts. I'm sorry he's gone. Wonderful composer, great melodist, great sense of harmony, great sense of melody, great sense of counterpoint, and beautiful clarity. Lou Harrison says prototonality. The last term suggests what is actually the case, present even in a random multiplicity of tones, or better, sounds, so as to include noises, is a gravity original and natural, proto to that particular situation. Elementary composition consists in discovering the ground of the sounds employed and then letting life take place both on land and in the air. Okay, Cage is speaking a little fancifully or a little poetically here, but what he's saying is that we have a basic sonority and we explore it. We look at what is latently implied in a fundamental sonority itself, even if that fundamental sonority is noise, or not just straight pitch. Okay. Let's get back to atonality and then this reading. It looks like we're just going to get through this one talk because I'm giving too much commentary. But that's okay, because that's today's topic. John Cage's Poetics, Structural Poetics. Poetics of Structure. Cage says here, the disintegration of harmonic structure is commonly known as atonality. All that is meant is that two necessary elements in a harmonic structure, the cadence and modulating means, have lost their edge. Increasingly, they have become ambiguous, whereas their very existence as structural elements demands clarity, singleness of reference. Okay, we talked about this in relation to Wagner and Tristan, right? Atonality is simply the maintenance of an ambiguous tonal state of affairs. And a lot of Tristan, for example, is an ambiguous tonal state of affairs. It is the denial of harmony as a structural means. Well, that's not Tristan, because there is ultimately big cadential climaxes at the end of Tristan, right? And also at the end of every act. The problem of a composer in a musical world to this state is to supply another structural means, just as in a bombed-out city the opportunity to build again exists. And keep in mind, though, that this was composed in 1949 in the wreckage of World War II. And so this was a metaphor that was very realistic to people at the time. Let's read his comments 7 and 8. The problem of a composer in a musical world in this state of ambiguous tonality is to supply another structural means. So what he says of another structural means, he says, neither Schoenberg nor Stravinsky did this. The 12-tone row does not offer a structural means. And again, what Cage means by structure is rhythmic structure over an entire piece, global rhythmic structure. It is a method, a control, not of the parts, large and small, of a composition, but only of the minute note-to-note procedure. It usurps the place of counterpoint, which, as Carl Ruggles, Lou Harrison, and Merton Brown have shown, is perfectly capable of functioning in a chromatic situation. For composers, what Cage is saying here is that that chromatic voice leading is always about maintaining the collection, right? All 12 tones in sort of in singular, non-repetitive, non-duplicating repetition. Neoclassicism, in reverting to the past, avoids, by refusing to recognize the contemporary need for another structure, gives a new look to structural harmony. This automatically deprives it of a sense of adventure, essential to creative action. So he's denouncing the later Stravinsky, the neoclassical Stravinsky. But of course, this is before Stravinsky rediscovered 12-tone chromaticism. After, Stravinsky in 1949 was still writing neoclassically. In other words, Cage is drawing a line after the rhythmically structured adventure, Le Sacre de Printemps and Les Noces, and, he's rejecting the neoclassical works from Pulcinella up through the Rake's Progress, which was just, I guess, being composed at that time. That was footnote 7. Footnote 8, a bombed-out city, the opportunity to build again. 0 hour, post-World War II. He says here, the 12-tone row offers bricks but no plan. The neoclassicists advised building in a way it was before, but surfaced fashionably. Okay. He says, this way one finds courage and a sense of necessity. Cage now goes back to Meister Eckhart, interlude, Meister Eckhart. But one must achieve this unself-consciousness by means of transformed knowledge. This ignorance does not come from lack of knowledge, but rather it is from knowledge that one may achieve this ignorance. Then we shall be informed by the divine unconsciousness that in our ignorance will be ennobled and adorned with supernatural knowledge. It is by reason of this fact that we are made perfect by what happens to us rather than by what we do. So, in conclusion, what Cage has to say, he wants to integrate these thoughts of Meister Eckhart into musical practice. And he says here, I'll just some concluding comments for this talk. He says, at random, music means nothing as a thing. A finished work is exactly that, requires resurrection. The responsibility of the artist consists in perfecting his work so that it may become attractively disinteresting. It is better to make a piece of music than to perform one. Better to perform one than to listen to one. Better to listen to one than to misuse it as a means of distraction, entertainment, or acquisition of culture. Let me repeat that. It is better to make a piece of music than to perform one. Better to perform one than to listen to one. Better to listen to one than to misuse it as a means of distraction, entertainment, acquisition of culture. So Cage is being very seriously here. He says, what's important and what's most valuable and what we must hierarchically prioritize are making a piece of music, performing it, and listening to it in that order and not misusing it. I agree. He says, use any means to keep from being a genius, all means to become one. So don't pretend to genius, just do it. Finally, he says, is counterpoint good? The soul itself is so simple that it cannot have more than one idea at any time of anything. A person cannot be more than single in attention. Eckhart. So what Cage is making a paradoxical comment about counterpoint in musical composition, that we can have on the page several notes happening at once and several instruments playing. But what Meister Eckhart is saying, and science bears Eckhart out, is that we can actually only focus on one sound at a time. So our consciousness is actually monophonic, not polyphonic, and that we process a polyphonic texture monodically or monophonically, one note at a time. So a real counterpoint should really only have one attack, in my opinion. That's how I understand that. Freed from structural responsibility, harmony becomes a formal element, serves expression. Say that again. Freed from structural responsibility, that is to say, by structural responsibility, Cage means rhythmic structure, the durational structure of an entire work. Harmony becomes a formal element. It serves expressive harmony, right? Our traditional idea of 1-5-1 and classical practice, right? But it says, imitating either oneself or others, care should be taken to imitate structure, not form. Okay, again, Cage by structure means rhythmic durational elements, not form. Also structural materials and structural methods, rhythmic, time-bound, silence-oriented, not formal materials and formal methods. Disciplines, not dreams. Thus, one remains, quote, innocent and free to receive anew with each now moment a heavenly gift. Eckhart, that's a quote or a paraphrase from Meister Eckhart. If the mind is disciplined, the heart turns quickly from fear towards love. I just want to give a little postscript here. We can say here, there's another footnote here. Measure is literally measure, nothing more, for example, than an inch of a ruler, thus permitting the existence of any durations, any amplitude relations, meter, accent, any silences. And that's his comment on this one. It says, before making a structure by means of rhythm, it is necessary to decide what rhythm is. This could be a difficult decision to make if the concern were formal, expressive, or to do with method, point-to-point procedure. But since the concern is structural, to do with divisibility of a composition into parts large and small, the decision is easily reached. Rhythm, in the structural instance, is relationships of lengths of time. Such matters then as accents on or off the beat, recurrent or not, pulsation with or without accent, steady or unsteady durations, motifically conceived, either static or varied, are matters for formal expressive use, or if thought about, to be considered as material in the textual aspect as serving method. Okay. In case of a year, rhythmic structure is a matter of seasons, months, weeks, and days. Other time lengths, such as taken by a fire or the playing of a piece of music, occur accidentally or freely without explicit recognition of an all-embracing order, but nevertheless necessarily within that order. Coincidences of free events with structural time points have a special luminous character because of the paradoxical nature of truth is at such moments made apparent. Caesurae, on the other hand, are expressive of the independence, accidental or willed, or freedom from law from freedom. Okay, I think we're going to draw the line there. All right, and this is a succinct statement of John Cage's philosophy of rhythmic structure as musical form, of time lengths. And this is how I compose. So the music you're hearing in the background is based upon predetermined time lengths, which are then broken into very fine millisecond structures, and then which are then grouped to create these fluid forming, which are these, these aggregations of acoustical sine waves and textures that you hear here in the background. So this is, I've tried to put Cage's Poetics of rhythmic structure into practice, into my own artistic practice, and I hope you've been able to benefit from hearing his words. I'll draw a line here. Maybe we'll come back later at some point to Cage's rhythmicized lecture on nothing, and which is essentially a rhythmic composition for voice and words, which is also used as a pedagogical tool. Okay, thank you. I think that's enough for now. This has been this week's episode of Art is the Church of God the Creator. I am Gregory Muna. I am at the command of God the Creator, as are you, as are we all. Be well, be in touch, keep those comments coming, and recommend it to friends. Greg Muna, aka Master Moo. See you soon. Be in touch.